Welcome back, everybody, to our studies in GCSE history. In this lesson, what we're going to do is spend some time thinking about the German economy during this time period, specifically the major industrialization that we see during the reign of Kaiser Wilhelm II, sometimes known as the Second Industrial Revolution, and really entering the highest phases of industrialization. We will think about the economic transformation that happens during this time period. We will think about the driving forces that really push this growth to take place. And we will think about the infrastructure and social and living conditions that develop as a result, bearing in mind that social reforms, actual policies to change social structures, will be the subject of the next video. So really, the German economy during this time period sees what I've just described as a sort of second industrial revolution, roughly 1870, 1880, all the way through to the start of the First World War. And this is really what we see as the high phase of industrialization. There is an emphasis on new sectors in society. There is an emphasis on the use of electricals, the manufacturing of electricals, of electricity, of chemicals. Chemical plants become a really key feature of the German economy. So too do motor vehicles. On top of its existing strength in what are known as sort of old industries, so things like steel and coal and railways that you see in the start of the Industrial Revolution all the way back in the early 1800s, late 1700s. And we can see that this has a major effect by the start of the First World War. For example, coal output surges from around 30 million tonnes in 1871 at the point of unification and reaches as much as 190 million tonnes by 1913. Now, I've basically rounded some of these figures up so that you're not having to remember very specific details. So these are rough estimates, okay? So just bear that in mind, that if you're going to write them in an essay, we're talking about rough estimates. You don't need to know the exact number of tons in the millions that were produced in 1871. Just have a good understanding of the kinds of growth and the kinds of statistics that we can see. Similarly, steel production would triple between 1900 and 1914, while coal and iron production would double by that time period. By 1913, then, new industries become a really, really important feature of the German economy. Things like German firms accounting for around half of all global electrical exports, roughly 50%, with electrical energy usage increasing by around 150% between 1901 and roughly 1915, just into the First World War. And you end up with huge industrial firms. Companies like BASF and Bayer control around 90% of the world's chemical dyes industries and pharmaceutical markets by the First World War. So this second industrial revolution is not just a high phase of industrialization in the traditional industries, in industries like coal and steel and railway networks and iron, but also in newer industries, in electricity, in pharmaceuticals, in chemicals. These are new industries that pushes greater amounts of economic growth. And so fundamentally, we see quite a lot of economic growth. Germany becomes one of the most highly industrialized, one of the most economically prosperous countries in the world at the start of the First World War. What drives this? Well, there are a few reasons why these firms grow, and there's a few reasons why the economy grows. The first is natural resources. Germany had quite an abundance in terms of coal, iron, potash, and things like navigatable rivers, especially in areas like the Ruhr, the Saar, and Silesia, as well as areas around the River Rhine. These are all areas that are quite well known for their industrial output. Saar, for example, had quite strong coal fields and things like that. Silesia is also very, very well known for its coal and its iron production as well. And the fact that there are navigable rivers, things like the River Rhine, for example, powers heavy industry and logistical expansion. So there are just natural geographical reasons why Germany outperforms other countries in terms of its industrialization during this time period. There is also actual reasons that are policy decisions that make this possible as well. The Kaiser's government invested in railways. It encouraged the formation of what we call cartels. The steel cartel, for example, in 1882. It applied what are known as protective tariffs. So essentially a tariff is a tax on imports. So let's say, for example, I wanted to buy a pen from abroad. Let's say if there was a tariff on pens, it means that as it comes into this country, there is an additional import tax. There is a tax that is added to that pen. Now, how that works, generally speaking, is that the people who make the pens, who have to pay that tax, will pay that tax by charging more money for the pen. So the pen will be more expensive. And the reason why you might do that is because if, let's say, there is a UK-based pen company that makes pens domestically, then they won't have an import tax because they're made in the UK. And so that incentivizes everybody to go and buy those pens rather than buying the pens from abroad, because those pens are cheaper. It's sometimes known as protectionism. You're protecting your domestic industries by making all of the industries that are from different countries more expensive. And so if there's a coal industry, it becomes more expensive to import coal than to just make it yourself at home and all this kind of stuff. And this is sometimes known as protectionism. And that's what tariffs do. And there are sometimes good reasons to have tariffs. These days, tariffs are not as vital or important or useful. But at least back then, when everyone was imposing tariffs everywhere, the United States, for example, was imposing tariffs here, there, and everywhere, it becomes more beneficial to just protect your own domestic industry rather than try and get things coming from abroad. Another reason why there's economic growth is because of bank-firm alliances. Universal banks would begin to finance industrial giants, so banks like Deutsche Bank, for example, and this would foster long-term investment and it would establish an integrated industrial financial nexus. Finally then, when we think about the ways in which industrialization grows, I mentioned the use of navigatable rivers and sort of infrastructure, and this is really, really important as well. So infrastructure obviously is going to make it a lot easier for industrialization, given that you can move items and products and people from one part of the country to another part of the country. And so as a result of which, railways and shipping becomes a very important part of any growing economy. And in Germany, it is no different. The length of railways, for example, grew from around 41,000 kilometers in 1890 to as much as 63,000 kilometers by the start of the First World War in 1913. Merchant marine shipping tonnage, for example, outpaced even the United States, although it still nevertheless lagged behind Great Britain. And then finally, we have the firm's cartelization, as it can sometimes be described. So firms in coal, steel, and chemicals would form cartels. One example of this is the Rhenish-Westphalian Coal Syndicate, which was established in 1893. And what this did was it stabilized the prices of products for coal, for example, and it regulated production and underpinned rapid industrial scaling and increased in scaling, all of which contributes to a major development in growth and price stabilization for these major industries at this time.